Hi everyone, this is Matt Hendricks with the Sharpening Guy LLC, and today I'm going to show you how to strop a straight razor. So learning to strop your straight razor is really important because if you want to be able to get comfortable shaves from your razor, you're going to have to strop it right before each shave. Now, in order to understand how to strop it, you need to understand the purpose of stropping your blade. If you look at your average straight razor and you look down the end of the blade like this, you'll see that the blade is hollow ground. There are wedge ground razors, but most of the blades are hollow ground, okay? So what that means is that each side was ground out with a wheel, so it's concave on each side of the blade, like this. The reason this is important is that when a straight razor is honed, the razor blade is laid flat on the stone. And what this does is this creates a flat hone line along the edge of the spine and along the edge of the blade. And so if you look at the side of your razor, you should see two hone lines, one here and one down by the edge. And this comes from being laid flat on the stone. Now, the reason this is important to understand is because when you strop your razor blade, you have two goals. One goal is to line your razor blade up. If the edge got damaged at all during your last shave or anything like that and it's just slightly off to one side or the other, the strop will clean that up and make it all nice and smooth again. Now, I should say that obviously if your razor really has some real damage on it, it will have to be rehoned and stropping won't be enough. But for just the day-to-day disturbance that goes on when you shave and that happens to the edge, the strop will line that up. The second thing that the strop does is it lubricates the cutting edge of the blade. The oils that are naturally found in the leather of the strop will lubricate the edge and will make the shave more comfortable that way. So with that in mind, before we can move on to actually how to strop the blade, we have to look at the different types of strops available. There are four main types of strops available. There is the traditional hanging strop, which usually consists of a leather piece and oftentimes a prep side, which traditionally was made of linen. A lot of times nowadays it's made of either cotton or nylon webbing or even blue jean material or seatbelt material. The next type of strop is there is a paddle strop, which is essentially you have the paddle that you can hold. These are usually made of wood, and then the leather is either glued to the strap, or in this case, this is a modular design, so it's magnetic. So I can use different types of leather or replace the leather if I cut it or something like that without having to replace the whole paddle. The next type of strop is the bench strap. This particular one has paste on it. Which at home, by the way, I do not recommend that you use paste on your strap, but anyway, this is a bench strap. Essentially, it works the same way as a paddle strap, except that you can sit it on your table or counter or wherever you're going to be using it, and that way you can use two hands with the razor instead of one. And the last type of strap, which I don't have an example of here, is called a loom strap. And essentially, it's kind of like a cross between a paddle strap and a hanging strap. And what a loom strap is it has a handle and then it has a frame. And so it has a flat section on each end, and then they stretch either leather or linen or fabric or whatever the strap material is around the frame. And the handle has a screw mechanism, so when you twist the handle, it tightens the leather around the frame and makes it nice and taut. So it essentially is going to give you the same effect as if you used a hanging strap, except you don't have to hold on to the other end of the strap to pull it tight. You just hold on to a handle like you would with a paddle strap, but it still has slightly more give than this, like a hanging strap would. So now that you know what the four types of strops are that you can use, you might want to know, well, what type is the best? What type should I buy? And the answer is any of those four types of strops will work fine as long as you use them properly. And that's the important part. Now, that being said, because you don't want to round your razor blade over, The easiest types of strops to use are either a paddle strop like this one or a bench strop like this one. Because since these have a hard backing, when you strop your blade with them, it's a lot harder to round over the edge than if you were using a hanging strop or a loom strop. Now, that doesn't mean that these will do any better job. It just means that they're a little bit easier to use. So now that you know what the types of strops are that are available, I'm going to show you how to actually strop your blade. Now, first I'm going to show you with a hard back type strop, and I'm going to use a paddle strop, and then I'll show you how to strop with a hanging strop. Now, both of these types of strops, like I said before, will do an equally good job. I just believe a paddle strop or a bench strop is going to be easier to learn how to use, so that's why I'm going to show how to use it first. Now, the first thing to know is that when you strop your razor, you're going to hold the handle straight out like this, or you're going to open it so it's straight out like this. Because when you shave, as you know, you hold it like this. But when you strop, you're going to want the handle straight out. Now, that being said, some people, myself included, prefer if the handle is tilted slightly back like this, and they feel that it's easier to flip the razor. But either way, you want your handle more or less parallel with the blade. I'm demonstrating with a 5/8 inch razor here because that is probably the most common size that people learn to shave with. The wider the razor blade is, the easier it is to strop, and the narrower the blade is, the easier it is to shave with. So that's why a 5/8 is kind of right in the middle, and that's why most people start with it. So now that you've got your handle more or less straight out from the blade, you're going to take your thumb and your index finger, and maybe your middle finger depending, and you're going to hold the tang of the razor like this. And then you're going to take your other 2 or 3 fingers, depending on how many you're using on the tang, and wrap them around the handle like this. Now, when you strop, you're going to have to be able to rotate the blade up over like this. So it's going to be on its spine, and you're going to have to leave the spine in contact and be able to rotate the edge up and over the spine like this. Now, to do that, I use both my 3 fingers in the back like this, and also I help a little bit with my thumb and index finger. Now, the other thing I do with my thumb and index finger is I use them to push down lightly, not with heavy pressure, but just lightly on the tang there, so that I know that the blade is making good contact with the strop. So, when you strop a blade, you don't want to round the edge over. That's pretty much the biggest mistake you can make, as we talked about earlier. So, you always want to set the spine down first, and then put your edge down. And then you move backwards along the strop, which is away from the edge, and then you flip the blade over on the spine of the razor, and then you move away from the edge going the other way. And then you flip the blade over like this. And so this is what normal stropping looks like. Now, what you don't want to do is flip your blade over with the edge pointing down. It's easy to round off your razor, and it's also much easier to cut your strop that way. So always set the spine down first, flip the razor over on the spine, and when you go to stop stropping, pick the spine up last. And if you follow those instructions, then you have a very low likelihood of damaging your edge, especially if you're using a hardback strop, because it's so hard to round over the edge with one of these. So essentially, for day-to-day stropping, all you would have to do is lay your spine on the strop, set the edge down, go backwards, flip over on the spine, go backwards again, and do this for maybe 30 to 50 times back and forth. And that would be enough to both line up your edge and lubricate it and get your razor ready to shave with. Now, there are a couple of mistakes that people can make when using the stropping technique. One is that they can either lift the toe of the razor up or the heel of the razor up while they're doing it like this, and I'm exaggerating so that you can see it better. But they essentially do something like this to a lesser extent, and so most of the blade isn't really touching the strop. So obviously if you're doing this, you're not really stropping the blade, you're just stropping like a corner of the blade, and it will not shave well. So make sure that you keep your blade flat this way. The other thing that people do sometimes is they don't quite get the edge set down. They'll go like this and they'll leave the edge floating. Of course, it's an accident and they think it's down, but they just don't quite get it there. And so obviously, again, if that's the case, you're not really stropping the edge of your razor, and so it won't really be effective. So, but if you keep those two things in mind, make sure the edge is actually touching the leather and that it's touching along the full length of the blade. You just do 30 to 50 strokes like this, and you can start off slower. Don't try to be fast. You will gain speed naturally as you get better at it. And so you just do your 30 to 50 laps, and then your razor should be shave ready. Now, using a hanging strop is really very similar to using a pedal strop, except you have to be even more careful not to round over the edge. So the other difference is, while most pedal strops only have a leather side or they have leather on both sides, most hanging strops have what's called a prep side and then the smooth leather side. So you can just use the leather side, and if you do, that's fine. But if you have a prep side, whether it's linen or cotton or nylon or whatever, it doesn't hurt to do 5 or 10 strokes on it just with light pressure before moving to the leather side and doing your 30 to 50 strokes. This just helps clean anything off the blade, and it's slightly more aggressive than the leather. So if your blade did happen to have a slight bend in the edge, this would do a little bit better job of realigning it than if you just use the leather. Now, like I said, it's not necessary, but if you have one, you're welcome to use it. But whichever side you use, and by the way, you always use the leather side last. If you use the prep side, you just do 5 or 10 strokes on it with light pressure, and then you switch over to the leather and do 30 to 50 on the leather before you go shave. So you always finish with the smooth leather. Anyway, so when you use a hanging strop, what you need to do is you need to hook it somewhere securely. Now, I like mine mounted about here. Some people prefer theirs mounted higher or lower, so find out what's comfortable for you. But anyway, you need to hook it here, and then you need to pull it tight like this so that it's taut. And you can either hold the other side up below it, or you can just let that hang like that. And either way is fine. I just prefer to hold on to mine. Now, so once you pull it tight, you do the same thing as on the paddle strap. You set the spine down, you put the edge down, you move backwards, you roll the razor over on the spine, and then you do the same thing in reverse. And you just keep going back and forth like this. Now again, you can start off slower like this, and then as you gain confidence, you will naturally start to speed up to where you can strop your razor blade quite quickly. Now, one thing I should mention, and this is true of both a hardback strop and a strop like a hanging strop or a loom strop, is you'll notice that when I strop and the edge actually touches like it should, it makes a certain sound. Now, let me take a few strokes without quite touching the edge, and you'll see that it sounds different. Versus. So, just as a side note, if you listen to what your stropping sounds like, you can oftentimes tell if you're doing a good job. But anyway, so that being said, the main thing with the hanging strop, again, is just to keep it tight and just use light pressure so that you're not rounding over the blade. A little bit of give in the strop like this is inevitable, and that's okay. But if you were holding it looser like this and using it, you would round your edge over and it just wouldn't shave well. Now, so again, if you wanted to use a prep side, you could just do like 5 or 10. And then flip it over and you do 30 to 50 on the leather. So for basic stropping, that's all there is to it. You do want to be careful. Like on this strop, you see these leather pieces at the end, so you don't want to flip it over and hit one of those with the edge, because obviously then your razor would have to be rehoned. Or on this pedal strop, this wood part sticks up by the handle, so obviously you wouldn't want to come along and hit that. But otherwise, that's basically all there is to stropping. It's not that difficult. You just have to make sure that you don't round over your edge, so either use a hardback strop or make sure you pull the strop tight. Use light pressure and always keep the spine in contact with the strop. The edge should never be in contact with the strop unless the spine is also in contact with the strop. Now, I should mention, this is a 3-inch wide strop, and so I can just go back and forth like this, and it covers the whole blade. But if you had a narrower strop that was, say, 2 inches or 2.5 inches, you just do a diagonal like this as you strop, and that way you can cover the whole blade. And that works just fine on both a narrower paddle strop or a loom strop or a hanging strop. And most of the old barber strops were actually only 2.5 inches wide, so most of them did use a pattern like this versus just going straight back and forth. So a 3-inch strop is fine if you have one, but if you don't, just make sure you use a diagonal. Now, the other thing I should mention is that in theory, a razor blade should be perfectly straight, and a lot of them come pretty close to that. But some razor blades have a slight warp to them. Now, most of these blades can still be honed properly and stropped properly, and they'll shave just fine. But you do have to strop a little bit differently if your blade has a warp to it. Because if you think about it, if your blade has a warp and you're laying it on a flat surface, especially if you're using either a paddle strop or a bench strop, you're not going to be touching all of the edge if your blade has a warp to it. And even with a hanging strop like this, if it's 3 inches wide and you're pulling it tight and just going back and forth, if you have a warped razor blade, you may not be making contact the whole length of the blade. So if you have this problem, you probably want to use an alternate stropping technique. And this technique can be done on both a hardback strop like a paddle strop or on a soft strop like a hanging strop. And it's pretty simple. All you do is you set this razor down the same way you did before, and you still move backwards. But instead of just going straight back and forth like this, or at a little diagonal like this if you have a narrower strop, you start and you just pull your blade straight off the strop. Now you don't push down because you don't want to sink that corner in, but you just go straight back with your pressure that way, just light pressure, and then you do the same thing the other side like this. And what this does is if you have a warped razor, this allows you to get in the warp and strop the entire blade much easier than using any other method that I know of anyway. And so again, you can do the same thing with a paddle strop like this. And you can do this on a razor with a perfectly straight blade too, and it will work fine if you're having trouble with the other technique. But this works particularly well, like I said, on warped razors. And the one other type of razor it works well on is if you have what's called a smiling razor. So you can see on this blade, the edge is basically flat, but some razors, the edge has a curve like this to them. And so it's called a smiling razor. Or you might say the blade has a smile in it. And so for those, obviously, the whole edge wouldn't make contact just going like this. But if you pull it off like this, then you can easily strop a smiling razor and have the whole edge make contact. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Whether you have a blade that's really nice and straight, or whether you have a blade with a slight warp or a smile or something like that, using one of these techniques, you should be able to strop your razor well enough that if it was honed properly when you're done stropping with it, you should be able to get 5s on the hanging hair test or treetop hair, or have a really comfortable shave with it. Now, the one thing I should mention is that if you are a beginner and you're just starting to shave with a straight razor, there are a lot of variables that determine whether or not you get a comfortable shave. And some of those are your lather, your face prep, how good you are at stretching skin, the angle you hold the razor at when you shave, and various other things. So just because your razor is sharp and even stropped properly doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a comfortable shave if one of those other variables is not working well. But if you have all the other variables nailed down and you know you're doing them properly, then you can test your razor by shaving with it, and if you've stropped properly, it should shave comfortably. Now, stropping your blade like this won't maintain your blade forever. Sooner or later, your blade will have to be rehoned. Now, I should mention, some people use paste on their strops or diamond spray or stuff like that. For day-to-day use, I don't recommend that. I recommend you strop on smooth, clean leather. And never strop on the rough side leather, by the way. Make sure you strop on smooth, clean leather. And If you have a prep side on your strop, feel free to do a few passes on that before going to the leather. It's not necessary, but if you have one, you're welcome to use it if you want. If you do use it, just remember to use it first and then do 30 to 50 strokes on the leather after you're done with it. Now, the one other thing I should mention is that not all leather, even the smooth side, is suitable for being a razor strop. So while it's possible to make your own strop and have great results with it, you do need to make sure, if you do that, that you research what type of leather you're getting and make sure you get something that will work for being a razor strop, and then make sure you prepare it so that it works well as a razor strop. And if you don't want to do that, then the easiest solution is to just do like I've done and just go out and buy a high quality strop from somebody who knows what they're doing. And if you look online, you'll see there's several available. But just make sure that you get one that has nice smooth leather, or the people have properly prepared it for being a razor strop. Don't get some cheap thing or something where the rough side of the leather is up or something like that, because it just won't work out very well for you. Alright everyone, that's all there is to it. Thanks for watching. I'm Matt Hendricks with the Sharpening Guy LLC.